Face it, we love jamming to our tunes while tooling down the road. A 2018 study by Emerson Research found out that some 70% of Americans over age 13 listen to audio in their automobile every day. And an ever-shrinking number of us recall when a 5.5-inch by 4-inch piece of plastic transformed our perception of driving forever. Along with hot pants and bell-bottoms, sideburns and disco, that 8-track player in your dad's Thunderbird represented not just a nostalgic era, but a revolution in freedom. It is history that deserves to be remembered.
Audio in automobiles is older than you probably imagine. According to the online radio museum, Lee DeForest, the radio technology pioneer who developed the Audion tube, demonstrated the first automobile equipped with a wireless receiver at the 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exhibition in St. Louis. DeForest's demonstrations received the Grand Prize Medal for General Excellence in Wireless Telegraphy on the exhibition's Electricity Day. There were various versions of radios in cars in the 1920s, but it wasn't until 1930 that the first mass-produced radios for cars were made by brothers Paul and Joseph Galvin. The Automotive Hall of Fame writes that Paul Galvin recognized the potential when his business selling radio parts started to fail during the Great Depression, but he noticed that car sales remained steady. The Hall of Fame writes, Galvin knew he needed to develop a practical and affordable car radio before the Great Depression took his business. The brothers demonstrated their car radio at the 1930 Radio Manufacturers Association Convention in Atlantic City to wide acclaim. The brothers sold their radios under the name of the company that they formed with inventor and businessman Bill Lear, Motorola, a combination of motor and Victrola. It was not cheap. The original model cost $130 in a time when a new Ford Model A cost about $540. Still, it was a game changer. The Hall of Fame concludes that Galvin made the car radio as important to driving as the steering wheel. Soon, radios became considered to be a standard feature. A 2012 edition of the webpage Mental Floss notes that by 1946, 9 million cars had radios. Thanks to the transistor, both size and price came down so that by 1963, 50 million cars, over 60%, were outfitted with radios. And by then, over one-third of American radio listening occurred in the car. By the mid-1950s, most car radios were also receiving the better quality FM broadcasts. But there was still a limit, even with the addition of push buttons that moved the radio to favorite stations. With a radio, you don't have much control over the songs coming out of your speakers. The first attempts to give the driver the ability to choose their tunes occurred in the mid-1950s, utilizing the most popular method of listening to music at home, the turntable. Highway Hi-Fi was, the website Ars Technica explains, the world's first in-car music system. The system used 7-inch phonographic records, but by slowing the turntable speed, held up to 90 minutes of music. In technological terms, Ars Technica notes, they were seen as a minor miracle. The system was exclusively owned by Chrysler. Came as an option in Chrysler automobiles starting in the 1956 model year. The albums were made under exclusive contract with Columbia Records. Highway Wi-Fi seemed destined to be a game-changer. Ars Technica writes, it was innovatory, a major talking point, arrived as the car market was booming as never before, and it came with much press hype. It also had the backing of a leading motor manufacturer. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, Chrysler was already backing off the product after just its first year. It was only available through the 1959 model year. There were several reasons that the concept failed. Had to be installed at the factory. Couldn't be done aftermarket. The machines tended to break down. Anyone trying to walk the floor next to a record player will understand how well the turntables withstood bumpy rides. When they broke, local repair shops were not equipped to fix them. An exclusive contract with Columbia meant that there were a limited number of records available. In other words, Ars Technica continues, the in-car format of choice was not actually delivering that much choice. In 1960, RCA produced a competitor that could play normal 45 records, vastly increasing the choice of music available, but at just 2 to 4 minutes each, 45s were not conducive to driving, where changing records was a challenge. Buck Bennett, owner of Dallas's 8-Track Museum, explained, they just had too many problems. No matter how hard they tried, the records just skipped constantly. They tried making the tone arm heavier, but a bump is a bump. It wasn't contained enough for the playing to be successful. They never really caught on.
Face it, vinyl was just not a very good fit for a moving automobile. but alternatives were on their way.
Magnetic recording tape, a method of recording information on a thin plastic strip, was invented in Germany in 1928. The first practical tape recorder, using a cellulose acetate-based tape coated with iron oxide particles, called the magnetophone, was demonstrated in 1935. But the invention had military implications and was kept secret. In 1945, a 1994 edition of American Heritage magazine notes, an electrical engineer with the U.S. Army Signal Corps discovered 2 magnetophones in the Radio Frankfurt studio and brought the recording medium back to America. After seeing a demonstration in 1947, Bing Crosby invested in developing a practical machine as a means to tape his weekly radio show. The resulting products revolutionized the entertainment industry in a number of ways. One development in 1954 was called the Fidelipack, which was used by radio stations to program things like commercials, promos, and single-song hits. While only marketed to commercial radio, the Fidelipack, usually simply referred to as a cart, which had a reel of 1/4-inch magnetic tape that rolled across an opening, was the first commercially available audio tape cartridge. But a colorful and enterprising entrepreneur named Earl Muntz saw potential. A car and electronics salesman, Muntz, who went by the nickname Madman and was known for outlandish advertising where he claimed to sell at prices so low that he must be mad, was also a self-taught electronics engineer. He saw the potential in the Fidelipack for use in automobiles. His design, officially the Muntz Auto Stereo, but usually referred to as Stereo Pack, had 4 tracks rather than the Fidelipack's 2, allowing 2 stereoscopic recording tracks. A lever allowed the listener to switch between the 2. Typically the 2 sides of an album. Originally selling for between $80 and $170, with tapes selling for around $3.50, Stereo Pack was the first cartridge, he emphasized the car part in advertising, in-car stereo system.
But there's a good chance that you have never heard of Stereo Pack or 4-track tapes, and that has a lot to do with Bill Lear, that guy that helped to found Motorola with the Galvin brothers.
In 1963, Lear had taken on another passion when he founded Learjet in Wichita, Kansas, and started producing the first business jets. Seeing the initial success of Stereo Pack, Lear engaged with Muntz to produce a system to provide audio inside his jets. But technology historian David L. Morton writes in his 2006 work, Sound Recording, The Life Story of a Technology, that he later decided to re-engineer the player and manufactured it himself. He designed a slightly simplified cartridge that was cheaper to manufacture, and that bypassed earlier patents. With 8 parallel tracks instead of 4, the system was called Stereo 8, but would be better known as 8-track. Frank Schmidt, an engineer on Lear's design team, said in an interview with the website 8-Track Heaven, he was interested in getting around the patents that Muntz had. All the early development that was done using the Muntz cartridges. We machined them and modified them and added a roller to them. We had dozens of Muntz decks and hundreds of cartridges. All our development work was done with them. As for sound quality, Schmidt noted, it was terrific. It was like nothing that had ever existed. We actually brought the best of the LP home stereo system to an automobile. Nobody had ever done it. Bennett explains how Lear made the 8-track the in-car player of choice. He's like, wait, my jet customers love having music in the air. Why can't I put this in cars? Lear went out and lobbied all the big auto manufacturers in Detroit and got them to introduce a line of 8-track players in their 1966 cars. The very first 8-tracks appeared in the marketplace in 1965 for the 66 cars. To put it in context, the first Beatles 8-track offered as a new release was Rubber Soul. Schmidt said of Lear, Bill was a marketing genius and a fundraiser. While Muntz's system might have been first to market, Bennett notes, the 8-track was truly the first mass consumer car format. Lear leveraged his connections with Motorola and the auto industry. Schmidt notes that he was a personal friend with William Clay Ford. The player was built by Motorola, and he made a contract with RCA Victor to create a large catalog of recordings for distribution. Bennett recalled, if you bought an 8-track player for your car, from the very first year, each car manufacturer gave you a free 8-track. It was like, Ford presents the swinging sounds of '66, and each company would do a new one every year. The music was a pretty safe selection of greatest hits of the day that wouldn't offend anybody. I don't think the Sex Pistols ever ended up on one. Initially, Muntz's Stereo Pack competed. The large advantage of the 8-track was that with twice as many tracks, a tape could hold more music, but often the actual recordings on a cartridge had the same playing time. Muntz ran ads saying, you get more with 4. although Muntz was a salesman. While the tapes were aesthetically similar, the systems were not compatible, and so Muntz started selling systems that included both 4- and 8-track players combined. In the end, the largest difference was in distribution systems. An Audio Engineering Society history notes, Muntz's marketing and distribution arrangements were spotty at best, relegating the 4-track format to the inferior status of a regional phenomenon, most popular in such locales as California and Florida, but unpopular or unknown in many other areas. On the other hand, a 2005 edition of the music collector's magazine Goldmine writes, Ford's backing for 8 tracks proved irresistible, effectively blowing away what opposition there was from other tape formats. Ars Technica writes, Muntz's California-based operation was soon no match for the international reach of Lear's team. By the end of 1969, the stereo pack had packed it in. Meanwhile, from its official September 1965 launch onwards, the 8-track went from strength to strength. The stereo pack became an obscure footnote, and the 8-track became a game changer. By 1967, 2.4 million players were in use. By the early 1970s, 8-track players were a common feature in most new car models, and many were retrofitted with players made by a number of manufacturers. By 1975, 8-tracks represented a third of the American record market and had become popular internationally.
And I can personally attest to the fact that 8-track player in your car changed your life. I still remember the first one that we had in a car in my mom's 1974 Oldsmobile Cutlass Salon. And like almost every other American, we began our 8-track collection with the Columbia Record and Tape Club, which would sell you your first 7 8-track tapes for just a penny.
Media historian Chad Childers wrote in a 2020 edition of the online magazine Loudwire, while the radio gave you plenty of stations you could punch through to find something to listen to, the 8-track tape gave you freedom. Bennett remarked, it's hard to convince people who weren't around then, but the 8-track was nothing less than revolutionary in the context of its time. It was the first time that you didn't have to listen to what was on the radio if you didn't want to. You could listen to the Beatles or Led Zeppelin or Hank Williams. Bennett argued in a 2012 edition of Collectors Weekly that the format was a selling point. If you think about it, of the dozens of formats over the last, say, 50 years, it's the only one that's self-contained. A cassette has like 3, 4, or 5 pieces, and when you lose 2 pieces, you throw it away. Even for the beloved LP, you've got the record, the sleeve, and the cover. The 8-track tape was just one object. You shove it in, you pull it out, and it's the exact size of your hand. I think people really responded to that. Notably, 8-tracks were invented first as a player for the car. It took 2 years before companies started producing in-home players, under the understanding that people didn't want to mess around with multiple formats. Since the invention of the radio, the challenge was how to get in-home quality and choice into the automobile. Now the automobile was transforming in-home hi-fi systems. Bennett remarks, then the home players took off. People were listening to them at home and in the car, and then they introduced the recording 8-track deck so you could make a mixtape at home on 8-track. You could buy a new Led Zeppelin LP plus a blank 8-track tape for $1 and then throw the album on the tape. That way you'd have the album for home and the tape for the car. 8-tracks ruled popular culture. A 1976 episode of the TV show Chips focused on thieves stealing 8-track players from cars. Ponchos was even stolen. The player used in the police car driven by the Blues Brothers in the iconic 1980 movie was an 8-track, as was the player in the TV and music group The Monkees' Monkey Mobile and B.A.'s van in the A-Team. The dashboard in Tony Manero's 1964 Chevy Impala from Saturday Night Fever was covered with 8-track tapes. It's not that 8-tracks were not without their issues. While they could fast forward and switch tracks, they couldn't be rewound backwards. They didn't do well in heat, could melt if left in a hot car. Sometimes the track would end in the middle of a song, and the song would simply fade out and then fade back in, something that Childers said even back in the 1970s would elicit a few groans and head shakes. Parts did wear out on the tapes, which if they got stuck in the player were nearly impossible to rewind, an issue that keeps some nostalgic 8-track collectors today from playing their tapes. A person named Lulu, complaining to the website 8-Track Heaven, said, you can't use 8-track tapes unless you have a book of matches or a wad of paper to hold them in place. I hated the little bastards. Yet they were simply better than everything that had come before, and they transformed more than car interiors. Goldmine writes, the portability of 8-track also made it a firm favorite with the troops in Vietnam. Trudging through the jungle with a phonograph was not practical. However, a lightweight 8-track player with its hardy cartridges and a battery pack was a viable option. The presence of music from home helped make the 8-track more than just a consumer product. It was in danger of evolving into a product of iconic status. So what went wrong? In the end, 8-tracks were killed by a technology that predated them. Compact cassette tapes had been introduced in the U.S. in 1964, a year ahead of 8-tracks, but their initial use was for recording and playback, as their slower play speed meant that their audio quality was not good enough for music, an issue compounded by the fact that most cassette player recorders weren't built with high-fidelity sound in mind. But that changed. Morton writes, when the first Dolby Corporation noise reduction system for cassette tapes made its debut in 1970, the cassette tape truly began its transition to a serious, high-fidelity instrument. Cassettes were smaller. Unlike 8-track tapes, they could be rewound to replay a favorite song. They made recording your own mixtapes easy, and if they unspooled, unlike an 8-track, you could easily fix them merely by using a pencil. Morton notes, recorded cassette sales, which had been nearly non-existent in the 1960s, began to eat away at 8-track tape sales by 1975, and during the next 5 years met and surpassed 8-track tape levels. Already in 1979, one journalist wrote an obituary for the 8-track, calling it unnecessary in the era of the cassette.
And so we moved on. The cassette moved on to the CD, moved on to the MP3, moved on to streaming music, and it seems like that era of the 8-track tape didn't last any longer than miniskirts, white belts, and crocheted vests. But that's a bit of a misconception, says Bennett, whose museum closed in 2015. 8-track tapes went on sale in 1965, but they continued retail sales until 1982, and continued mail order sales through record clubs close to 1988. They lasted a period of 23 years. And that period took me from my first birthday through my college graduation. I guess you could say that 8-track tapes were part of the history guy's history, along with millions of others. Childers understands. With 8-track tapes, he said, you could finally play a full record on a car drive whenever you wanted to. You were in control of what you listened to. And it sure did sound sweet, with the windows down, on a summer night. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy. Check out our community on thehistoryguideguild.locals.com, our webpage at thehistoryguy.com, and our merchandise at teespring.com, or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo. And if you'd like more episodes on Forgotten History, all you have to do is subscribe.